Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite authors of all time, Robert E. Howard. And specifically, we're talking about this book right here, Son of the White Wolf, which is a collection of 3 of his L. Borak stories. He had 4 of these stories that were published in his lifetime, and then posthumously, they were up to around 10 that were published after his death, starting in the 1970s. That were complete short stories that never made it into a pulp or were fragments of them that were fleshed out. This here is a book by Berkeley. It collects 3 of the 4 stories. It was put together by Glenn Lord, who was the literary agent for the Robert E. Howard estate for almost 28 years, and went out and preserved a lot of these stories like El Borak and was able to bring them back into the public view. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over the book here today. I'm going to review all 3 of the short stories that are contained here in Son of the White Wolf, including the eponymously named short story, Son of the White Wolf, which is the last here in this book. And then we're going to do the inevitable comparison, the comparison that you have to do whenever you're reading another Robert E. Howard character other than Conan, and compare it back to the his adventure hero, Conan the Barbarian. You have to do it. I think it's in the bylaws. So we'll do that again here on the channel. But what about this book right here, this specific book? This is a Berkeley book. It was published in 1978. I bought this book off the stands in 1978. I've had it in my possession ever since. And I last read it was in 1978. I just finished a reread of it here. It's got an absolutely fantastic cover here, wraparound cover by Ken Kelly that I think is absolutely one of his best, one of the best ones he ever put together. There's another one for the cover of Red Nails on the Carl Edward Wagner collection that I think is a little better, but this one is right up there with his top of his work. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. And this book came with a pull-out cover poster of that, which I dutifully ripped out after I got it, put it up on a wall. You can see where it's torn out of the middle of the book here, and it's been lost into the mists of time. But who is El Borak? If you're not familiar with El Borak is Robert E. Howard's desert adventurer. He's an American from Texas. He was an American gunfighter, a gunslinger, who decides to leave the United States and travel over to the Middle East, to Afghanistan and Arabia in order to seek his fortune, and he becomes an adventurer. And his real name is Francis Xavier Gordon, and he is called El Borak by the natives, and El Borak simply means the swift. And he's called the Swift by the natives because he is so fast with his guns, his knives, and his pistols that if you cross him, death is going to come to you in a very swift manner. Now, El Borak the adventurer, this American hero who goes over to the Middle East here in the early 1900s, his inspiration is absolutely derived from Sir Richard Francis Burton. It's not an accident that the name Francis Xavier Gordon rhymes alliteratively almost exactly like Richard Francis Burton, because he's modeled after Sir Richard Burton. He's also modeled after T. Lawrence, aka Lawrence of Arabia. So what are the 3 stories that are contained here in Son of the White Wolf? And they are, the first one is Blood of the Gods. It was originally published in 1935 in Top Notch Stories, a pulp magazine. The second story that's in here is Country the Knife. That was published in 1936, a year later, in Complete Stories, another pulp. And the last story in here, which is the eponymously titled Son of the White Wolf, was published in 1936, and I think it was in Thrilling Tales. I think that's the pulp it was published in, but I'll have to check that. The only other story that was published in Howard's lifetime was The Daughter of Erlich Khan from 1934, and that is not contained here in this book. So what about the 3 stories in here? What are they? We've got Blood of the Gods, Country the Knife, and you have The Son of the White Wolf. How good were they? How good are they reading here in 2025? And we'll start off with Blood of the Gods, the first one here in this book. So the first story, Blood of the Gods, starts off with an Englishman, an English adventurer over in Arabia who is a dastardly villain, and he is after the blood of the gods. And the blood of the gods are a set of unmatched, priceless rubies that were in the possession of the governor of Oman, whose name is Al-Wazir. And Al-Wazir was a wandering Russian adventurer who rose up through his own prowess and his own skills to become the governor of Oman. But he gives it all up. He decides that he wants to leave this style of comfort, this luxury that he's living in, the lap of luxury as the governor of Oman, as a virtual sultanate. And he wants to become a hermit and contemplate the meaning of life in the caves and the hills in Arabia. So he gives it all up. But when he leaves, the blood of the gods disappears with him. And Hoxton is convinced that Al-Wazir, this governor from Oman, this Russian wanderer and adventurer, has taken the blood of the gods with him. So he is seeking him out in order to find him and torture him and find out where these rubies are and take possession of them. And it turns out that Al-Wazir, this wandering Russian who has risen to the heights of power in the Middle East and is now a penniless hermit contemplating the wall in his cave for hours on end, is also a friend of El Borak. And El Borak gets wind of this plot by Hoxton to hunt down his friend and murder him for the rubies. And he sets out for the caves of El Khor, which is where his friend is staying, in order to get there ahead of Hoxton and his band of cutthroats and try to head him off and save his friend's life. And that, in a nutshell, without giving too much away, is the story of the Blood of the Gods. And it's a very solid story. It's a really good adventure novel. It is straight up pulp adventure fantasy. And all of these stories is just pulp adventure. That's what you're into. This is pulp heroes and pulp adventure fantasy as told by Robert E. Howard. El Borak is, for the most part, kind of a cardboard cutout pulp hero. And in these stories, all of these El Borak stories, there are no elements of supernatural. Everything is sort of in a historical backdrop, and you don't have any of the supernatural elements that pop up in his Cain, Kull, and Conan the Barbarian stories. So it's different from those stories in that respect. Blood of the Gods is a solid pulp adventure fantasy story. It's very good, but there is kind of something strange that Robert E. Howard does with the writing in the opening chapter of that opening story here in Son of the White Wolf. And what happens is Robert E. Howard, in a very un-Robert E. Howard-like manner, engages in or suffers a paroxysm of exposition in the opening chapter. And there is a couple of pages where it is just Robert E. Howard with a revolver just shooting exposition bullets at you, the reader, one after another, and saying, and then this happened, and then that happened, and this is related to that. And it's rather bizarre coming from Robert E. Howard, who didn't typically engage in that type of writing. But thankfully, once he gets this fit out of his system, this fit of exposition out of his system, the story continues in a very well-written, very solid manner, and with all of that typical powerful writing that you come to expect from Robert E. Howard. And that's Blood of the Gods. The second story is Country of the Knife. Country of the Knife is by far and away the longest story in here. It's about 75 pages in length. The whole book here is 180 pages in length. Country of the Knife is a little bit different. It's a little unusual as an El Borak story because most of the story is not told through the perspective of El Borak. Instead, it's told through the perspective of another American by the name of Stuart Brent. And the story kicks off not in the Middle East, not in Arabia, not in Afghanistan, but in San Francisco. Stuart Brent is a professional gambler. He lives in San Francisco. And one night in his luxurious apartment building where he resides, he hears a commotion outside of his door. He opens his door up, and there on the floor, right in front of his door, are two men struggling, and one is murdering a man on the floor, stabbing him repeatedly with a knife. Stuart Brent intervenes, saves the person's life, who's now bleeding out on his floor, drags him into his apartment, and bars the door as the assailant runs off. And it turns out that he recognizes this person as an English friend of his. This Englishman, as his dying breath is coming out of him, tells him of a plot to topple the British Empire in India and implores his friend, Stuart Brent, this professional gambler, that he has to travel over to Kabul, Afghanistan, and then head up into the hills to find El Borak and pass this message on to El Borak so that El Borak will know what to do and can save India from destruction. And that is how this story kicks off. And then you follow Stuart Brent from San Francisco over to Kabul, where the governor of Kabul gives him a troop of Afghani soldiers to go with him in order to find El Borak. So this message that has been given to Stuart Brent is about a secret society of Asiatic murderers known as the Black Tigers that reside in the city of Rub el Harami, that is the city of thieves in Afghanistan. He is traveling there, headed in that direction in order to try to contact El Borak and let him know of this plot that is being hatched by this secret society of assassins here in the city of Rub el Harami, the city of thieves. And it comes together with El Borak, the city of thieves, Stuart Brent, and a power struggle within the city of thieves that they become involved in that determines the fate of India. And it's a really good story. In fact, I thought it was the best of the three stories here contained in Son of the White Wolf. It does have a slight problem to it, though. It is never really fully explained exactly how the Black Tigers are going to potentially topple India and disrupt the British Empire. It's a bit of a plot hole here in the story, but it's rather irrelevant. And then that gets us to the last story, the eponymously titled Son of the White Wolf. Son of the White Wolf is back in Arabia, and we're now in World War I. We're set in the backdrop of World War I. T.E. Lawrence gets mentioned, Lawrence of Arabia gets mentioned in this story here, Son of the White Wolf. And he's sort of a driving factor here because it starts with a troop of Ottoman Turks who are cavalry. It's a troop of cavalry stationed in Arabia, and they decide to revolt. They murder their officer who's in charge of them. They take over their cavalry troop, and then they roll out onto what was a friendly village that they were stationed next to, and they slaughter every living human being in this village except for the women of marriageable age, who they then kidnap and then hid into the hills in order to recreate the ancient empire of Turan. I'm not kidding. No, we're back to the Turanian Empire from Robert E. Howard and Conan in the Hyborian Age. They're going into the hills in order to establish their base from which they want to roll out across Arabia and recreate the empire of Turan. Now, Robert E. Howard's hero, El Borak, he comes upon the village. He finds a survivor who was traveling into the village, who was a Turkish agent. He was protecting a famous German spy, a famous, beautiful, blonde-haired German spy. And this bodyguard of this female, beautiful agent was shot in the chest by these Turks and left for dead. And he wants El Borak to promise vengeance upon these renegade Turks. And El Borak replies back, "They shall die." And at that point, you know that their fate is sealed. This is a rather short story. It's only about 25 pages here at the end of this novel. It's a very short story. It is a decent story. El Borak at that point goes off on the trail, hot on the trail of these murderous Turks who have forsaken Islam and are going to bring back the pagan religions of Turan and reestablish the Turanian Empire. And he runs into a band of Bedouin marauders. And he has these Bedouin marauders that he persuades to go with him to kill these Turks. And the Bedouin marauders are less than trustworthy. So you have El Borak, who is with these marauders that he can't trust, going up against this troop of renegade Turks who are just bloodthirsty and evil beyond evil. And he's caught in between and has to negotiate the coming battle between these two forces and live to tell about it. And that is the final story, Son of the White Wolf. And these are good stories. These are good pulp action adventure stories. They're just straight up pulp adventure stories, but they are entertaining. I do recommend it. So how do they compare? We have to ask that question here now. The question that's written into the bylaws of Robert E. Howard. How does this stack up against Conan the Barbarian? It stacks up decently. It's different. This is different from Conan the Barbarian. You don't have those supernatural elements that are always present or nearly always present in the Conan stories. It's not as good as his best Conan the Barbarian. It's not up there with Tower of the Elephant, Beyond the Black River, Frost Giant's Daughter, Red Nails. It's not on that level, but it is very good. It is very worthwhile. If you enjoy Conan the Barbarian, there's a very good chance that these stories are going to appeal to you. It's Robert E. Howard writing with that forceful, powerful writing style that he has in Conan the Barbarian, bringing that style, but with a bit of a different hero, an American, set with this historical backdrop in the Near East, with these Middle Eastern adventures. And it's entertaining. I think you'll like it if you like Conan the Barbarian, and I do recommend it. Now, this story, Son of the White Wolf, the last one here in this book, put together by Glenn Lord, was actually adapted into a comic book, believe it or not. It was adapted into The Savage Sword of Conan, number 37, titled not Son of the White Wolf, but Sons of the White Wolf. And it's adapted by Roy Thomas. The pencils are by Sal Buscema, the brother of Big John Buscema. And it's an excellent adaptation of the El Borak story here by Roy Thomas and Sal Buscema, except that it's not El Borak. Roy Thomas converts it over and turns it into a Conan story. And in kind of a nice little ironic twist, he sets it in the ancient empire of Turan in the Hyborian Age. So you have these Ottoman Turks here who revolt, who want to recreate Turan, and then Roy Thomas just puts it straight into the Turanian Empire with a revolt of Turanian knights that Conan has to go after. And he adds a supernatural element into the story here in Savage Sword of Conan number 37. And it's very good. It's a really good adaptation here by Roy Thomas. So if you're looking to buy this book, Son of the White Wolf, you can get it on eBay here. You can get it on eBay even with the pull-out poster of this Ken Kelly painting that he did here for the cover. You can pick it up for $10. It's easy to get this. All three of these stories are also available for free on Project Gutenberg if you want to read them. Just type in the names of the titles of the stories and they'll pop right up. And then one last thing, while I was reading these stories here, doing a little bit of background research on the book on Glenn Lord and El Borak, I figured something out that I didn't realize, and that's that I have another one of El Borak stories in my library that I've had that I haven't read. This is one of the posthumous stories. It's not one that was published during Robert E. Howard's lifetime, but it is The Lost Valley of Iskander. It is a El Borak story. It's been sitting in my library forever. I didn't realize it was an El Borak story, and now I'm going to have to read this one as well. And it was also put together by Glenn Lord in 1974, and it is heavily illustrated by Michael Kaluta. And Kaluta just does a fantastic job. Here he's done a little bit of calligraphy and illustration on the title page. And then you get a really nice drawing of El Borak. I mean, just a fantastic little ink line drawing of El Borak by Kaluta. And then there's just a ton of illustrations throughout the book. All the chapter headers have a little bit of an illustration in it. And you get some nice background and backdrop pictures here as well, rendered in ink. It's really good. So I'm going to have to read this one. When I read this, I'll check it out and I'll review it here on the channel. But that's it for Son of the White Wolf. If you've read Son of the White Wolf, if you've read El Borak, tell me about it down in the comments section. I'd love to hear it. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up. And I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.